Thank you very much. Apologies for the delay, but we're going to go now into the middle of things. Like, first of all, of course, a great thank you to Sandra for the profoundly deserved dry introduction from your partner in crime. I think it was very diplomatically done. Very well. Thank you very much. I'm just going to repeat maybe a couple of points. My name is Matias del Campo. I'm an associate professor of architecture at Tubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning at the University of Michigan. And I'm also the director of the ARI Laboratory, the Laboratory for Architecture and Artificial Intelligence, which was co-founded with Sandra Manninger and members of the computer science, robotics, and data science departments. It is a profoundly interdisciplinary lab. First of all, I would like to thank very much the NYIT, Dean Maria Pervelini, Sandra Manninger, Athena Papadoulou, for the generous invitation to speak before the distinguished colleagues and students of the NYIT. This is indeed a great honor. This is a true premiere. The first time, can you somehow turn off the lights here to see the screen a little bit better? That would be great, thank you. So this is a true premiere. The first time I give a lecture about diffusions in architecture, artificial intelligence and image generators. Please forgive me for the occasional stuttering and cluttering of my language, the as and ers that are unavoidable in such an occasion, or me struggling to find the right vocabulary to explain what I'm trying to say in this book. I'm going to take briefly the description from the Amazon website description. Diffusions in architecture is a guide to diffusion models and their impact on design, with insights on how this novel artificial intelligence technology may disrupt the industry. The book delves into the impact of generative AI models and their effect on architecture design and aesthetics. Diffusions, as I like to call it in short, presents an in-depth analysis of how these new technologies are revolutionizing the field of architecture and changing the way architects approach their work. The architects presented in the book focus on the application of specific AI techniques and tools used in generative design, such as diffusion models, Dall-E 2, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, etc. It discusses how these techniques can generate synthetic images that are both realistic and imaginative, creating new possibilities for architectural design and aesthetics. 22 leading designers and theorists offer their insights, providing disciplinary depth by covering the full impact of these learning tools on architecture. But before we move any further, let's level the ground a bit and address the biggest elephant in the room. In the following, I will give you what could be described as a high-level executive summary of what AI is, or could be. I want to add the term AI itself was immediately recognized as a problematic terminology right after the initial artificial intelligence workshop in 1956, which took place at Dartmouth College. The workshop was formally proposed on September 2nd, 1955 by John McCarthy, Marvin Minsky, Nathaniel Rochester, and Claude Shannon. This proposal is credited with introducing the term artificial intelligence to the world. Generally speaking, artificial intelligence is an umbrella term under which a whole plethora of various approaches, algorithms, and techniques huddle together. Deep learning, predictive analysis, translation, all of them come together under the term artificial intelligence. Furthermore, Pedro Domingos, the author of the master algorithm, identifies 5 distinct tribes. But for now, all of this comes together in the term artificial intelligence. And it's subdivided into machine learning, natural language processing, speech, vision, etc. Pedro Domingos, the author of Master Algorithm, identifies 5 distinct tribes within the universe of AI concepts. Symbolists who have an inverse deduction idea, the connectionists who imitate the brain and have backpropagation, the evolutionaries who use genetic programming, Bayesians who deal with probabilistic inference, and the analogizers who utilize vectors as machines. Without a doubt, the most successful tribe we see today is the connectionist idea, which has been adopted by the vast majority of AI applications out in the wild. Though there are indications that a combination of the symbolist learning concept with connectionism could herald the rise of a completely new generation of highly potent machine learning algorithms. So how does this entire development that we have seen unfolding in the last couple of years affect culture now that we know, now that we're faced with a very specific ontology? In contemporary discourse, the emergence of artificial intelligence methodologies has manifested a transformative influence upon the landscape of creative expression. Over the course of recent years, we have witnessed a speedy integration of these innovative techniques within various artistic realms, encompassing the domains of visual arts, fashion, music, and literature. Of course, architecture is also not immune to this pervasive paradigmatic shift. Emerging as a veritable crucible of interdisciplinary collaboration, the intersection of AI and architecture reveals a nuanced network of computational ingenuity and design innovation. As guardians of the built environment, architects find themselves at the vanguard of this rapidly developing juncture, navigating the dynamic interplay between tradition and innovation, intuition and computation. Indeed, the advent of AI ushers a renaissance of sorts within architectural discourse, fostering a dialectical synthesis of human ingenuity and computational prowess. The question remains, does AI affect architecture? Well, let's see. This is a diagram published by Goldman Sachs in March 2023. It shows a selected number of areas of production, reaching from the build industry to healthcare, to management, to business, and so on, including architecture and engineering. This is a prediction model over the next decade. Well, architecture is affected with over 37% of the work market, meaning that every third job will be impacted by this development. Mind you, this does not mean that a third of all architecture jobs will disappear. This just means that they will change. The median for all this, for all the companies is, by the way, 25%. So we are a little bit over it, but everyone will be affected at least to a quarter. This in mind, it means that we have to take charge of that change. I have made the argument before that if we do not engage with AI as a discipline, someone else will do it for us, shutting us architects off from shaping this new paradigm in architecture. It means that investors and construction companies who see a benefit in using AI will do this behind closed doors, without the architect in the room. The faster we engage, the deeper we shape the discourse, the better we understand the technology, and we're able to apply it for the benefit of the future inhabitants of our architecture, the more indispensable do we make ourselves in a discipline within this new paradigm. Why do we need to demystify artificial intelligence in architecture? The problem is that the vast majority of the architecture community, but this might apply to populations generally speaking, is only seeing the very tip of a large iceberg. This topic of demystifying AI is very important to us, as the current state of knowledge in the architectural profession is unfortunately based more or less on hearsay, sensational headlines, and mediocrity researched articles. The architect's death in the face of AI was announced a little prematurely. Or as Mark Twain said it, the reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. What we currently see are the low-level access tools like ChatGPT, Midjourney, Dall-E, etc. The problem with those tools is that they rarely allow you to look under the hood to change things. There are remarkable exceptions such as Stable Diffusion that allows you to tweak a bit around and break it if necessary to learn the innards of the algorithm. However, beyond the superficial layer lies a vast expanse of algorithms poised to augment the capabilities of architects far beyond mere image generation. These algorithms represent a veritable arsenal of tools capable of optimizing diverse facets of architectural practice, from enhancing energy efficiency and minimizing material consumption to conducting life cycle assessments and devising economic frameworks. The potential applications are manifold. Moreover, these computational tools hold promise in addressing pressing social concerns, such as promoting equality and fostering inclusion within marginalized communities. Indeed, the predictive prowess inherent in AI algorithms offers unprecedented opportunities across a spectrum of architectural endeavors. In the realm of urban development, for instance, AI can be leveraged for forecast population growth, anticipate infrastructure needs, optimize resource allocations. Furthermore, these predictive capabilities extend to the exploration of novel aesthetic paradigms, enabling architects to push the boundaries of creativity and innovation. In a sense, the latent potential embedded within AI algorithms transcends conventional paradigms, empowering architects to navigate complex challenges with precision and foresight. Most importantly, underneath this plethora of algorithms that have profound implications for architectural production is the collected data. And this is where the architecture discipline tends to fail at the moment. This is one of the bookends, bonding agents of the thoughts presented in this lecture as well as in the book. The limits of my language means the limit of my world. But before we move on, let's have a brief look under the hood. I will not go into the depth of the mathematical details, as it would take too long. This is also not a computer science lecture, but rather the agitated ramblings of an interesting mind, or interested mind rather than interesting, listening to the murmurs of AI. What you see in the next couple of slides is an early example of the use of attentional models, the model that contributed ultimately to diffusion models, the grandfather of Midjourney, Dall-E, etc. This is the 24 high school project in Shenzhen, which was done with an attentional gun. What are attentional models? One example, attentional generative adversarial networks, attentional GAN, allow attention-driven multi-stage refinement for fine-grained text-to-image generation. Attentional GAN can synthesize fine-grained details at different subregions of the image by paying attention to the relevant words in the natural language description. In addition, a deep attentional multimodal similarity model computes a fine-grained image text matching loss for training the generator. For this project, we use the existing COCO dataset, common objects in context. A detailed analysis is performed by visualizing the attention layers of the attentional GAN. This project was done before things like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, GPT-2, or even GPT-3 existed. I want to add that two of our thesis students back then, Yining Yuan and Jianzi Chen, basically created the first proof of concept project using attentional GAN. What this long-winded technical explication really wants to say here is that this was one of the first things we found that was able to do text-to-image generation, and those images that resulted out of them were quite crude and primitive and didn't really depict any details. But we still took on the challenge to understand if you can use them as a design method for architecture by implementing that in this architectural design competition. In early 2022, the term disco diffusion started popping up on my radar. This animation was among the first ones I created in late winter 2021. And it literally defines the program for me of what diffusion models are capable of. Continuous iterations based on a very large scale data set. Why are we architects so fascinated with things like Midjourney, Dall-E, and so on, like these sort of things that create variation? I think that working through variations is so inherently embedded in our own DNA designers that we gravitate towards tools that allow us to do this. This is a simple example. 28 models iterating through the volumetric studies of a high-rise in Vienna by the atelier Hans Hollein in 2004. So 28 models, right? This is actually an image that I did, or I put together August 2022, when I figured out that from April 22 to August 22, I had generated over 70,000 images. And the reason why people got so excited about this was exactly this moment of being able to choose in the results. This, as I said before, this very architectural notion of working through variations to find the one aspect, the one variation that will provide us with an idea and an inspiration to a project. So, and then last year in very early spring, we basically made, Sandra Manning and I made this a topic for an artwork we did for the MAC in Vienna, which is called Mosaic, a gradient diffusion image made of 20,264 AI-generated images, or 23,629,929,060 pixels. Okay, a little bit of a long title, sorry for that. Okay, what does this mean further on? Like, where does this come from? How does this work? I mean, a lot of people are working with this, but never thought about why does this exist? Why do these diffusion models exist? By 2015, there were enough images annotated in a data set that somebody came up with the idea that, well, actually, what would be cool is if we could do automatic annotation, meaning I show a computer an image, and it will write the annotation for that image. So, for example, in this case, it was the caption that was generated was people walking on a bridge. So there was enough details recognized in the image, features, that the machine could actually just give it a name, give it a title, give this image a title. Now, somebody came up with the idea, wait a second, what happens if we turn it around? What if basically I say people walking on a bridge and it's supposed to generate an image out of it? Because if it works in one direction, it might work also in the other direction. This ingenious person was Elman Mansinov and his colleagues at Amazon Web Services. They created the very first attempt to do this. And we're particularly interested to create new or novel scenes. And of course, as you do, they immediately made a paper out of it. The paper was called Generating Images from Captions with Attention, and was published in 2016. So this is like the birthplace and the moment that those things became prevalent and really more visible for people. And the funny thing is, wait a second, going a bit too early, too fast, one back. Yeah, that one. These were the first images that were published in this paper about generating images with text. And you see, like, they had prompts like a stop sign is flying in blue skies, a herd of elephants flying in the blue skies, a toilet seat sits open in the grass field. The reason why these images look, by the way, so blurred is because at that time, the maximum resolution that everyone could do with these models was 72 by 72 pixels. And Sandra might remember at the beginning, we had the same problem when we tried to do this with architectural imagery. It was very hard to recognize what it actually is, which also sometimes is an advantage because you as a human can start interpreting what it could be. In short, what happens in a diffusion model is you take data, in this case, for example, Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Museum, and you start to add noise iteratively, more and more and more and more until it's a completely random noise image. Then you turn the process around and you basically are able to organize the pixels within the data set in a way that they correspond with the prompt that you're giving it. So in this case, for example, it was Alpine Villa. Yeah. So it takes those pixels and basically organizes them along a so-called Markov chain into the image that you actually are prompting it to do. It's optimizing towards the goal of giving you the best possible image. In short, data comes in, it gets decomposed or deconstructed by adding noise. Then so it's noisy, 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 noisy until it becomes completely random noise at the end of this process. And then it turns the whole thing around and starts to denoise the images along the vector of your prompt so that it basically can generate an image that is optimized towards the goal that you set it to, which is the prompt that you gave it. In more detail down here is actually just one of these denoising steps, because one is adding noise, the other one is denoising when you're actually creating an image out of it. And it becomes sharper and sharper over time. There's actually a bunch of animations online where you can see that, how it becomes like blurry and then it becomes sharp again. This would be, for example, like just one transition between Villa Savoy and something that I prompted again also as an Alpine. Funny enough, the book that I'm showing today is also based on prompting. It was not sort of designed by me, the graphic design of it, but basically I prompted Midjourney to give me the graphic design for a book that's going to have a lot of images and it's going to be about Midjourney. And let's see what happens. This took me about 3 hours to come up with something. Was like, yeah, that's kind of, yeah, looks not so bad. I think I can use that. But it took like several weeks to transform that into an InDesign file. So you see the work is just changing. You still have to work, yeah? So what is the book actually about? Oops, sorry. What is the book actually about? I already at the beginning was talking about, you know, with the way how we experience this explosive growth of interest in diffusion models, basically starting in summer 2022. And I was basically sitting around with, actually I have to say that we had these meetings during the pandemic with a bunch of people talking about this, like what's currently happening. And that's when I decided to do this book, was June 2022, I think, yeah? So how do you organize a book like that? You have to, first of all, think of a form of taxonomy of diffusions, because the problem is there's two ways to gather information, right? There's the way Mario described this really nicely, I think the second digital turn, that basically humans sort and machines search. Is that right? Sort of? Sort of? Yeah. Okay. So humans sort. We have boxes where we'll put things in so we can find them again. And machines can take a pile of stuff and just quickly search what you're looking for. Yeah. As this book was designed for humans, I had to find a human method to do it. So if you think about diffusions, which I was briefly mentioning before, is defined with, there were several papers that defined them, like Oriol Vinjas, neural image caption generator from 2015, or I mentioned before already Elmar Manisov generating images from captions with attention. And they also do things like clip and attentional gun and so on. I mentioned also that this one was the one that actually led to the first projects that use text-to-image generation. And then very quickly, things like disco diffusion came up, late 21, early 22, Midjourney, Dall-E, stable diffusion, et cetera, et cetera. So there's like a certain techniques and technologies that came about. But I wanted to somehow capture the architectural idea behind it, not so much just the technicalities of what it can do. I'm trying to understand if I analyze the articles that I got sent for the book, it was pretty clearly clear that you can divide them into a box called estrangements, a box called vestures, a box called commerances, and a box called suppositions. And for each one of those, there were like sub-ideas, like commerances can be divided into dwellings, residences, temporal shelters, abodes, things like strange places. Vestures can be envelopes, exteriors, frontages, wrappings, and fashion. And for each one of these categories, I actually assigned also a set of authors that were then put into this sort of category. So I created these very human boxes to stuff in so that we can better understand what we're looking at. Once this was done, it was also, of course, very interesting, like how a variety of theoretical ideas like estrangement, defamiliarization, surrealism, and so on, how those come into play with this imagery that we see emerging from those diffusion models, because there was part of the conversation was that, yes, they do create this sort of provocative, different ways of looking at imagery, and how can we benefit as architects out of it? The red lines in this diagram show that there's, of course, intersections between those. There's not like super clear-cut chapters. There will be always sort of cross-speaking between those different categories, which I think is quite interesting. So the first large box I created is the suppositions. Yeah. I actually thank Mario Carpo. Thank you, Mario, for the amazing insightful article, Rice or Pasta? Choose Your AI, which refreshingly humorously approaches this complex problem in a certain, but it's certainly also one of the highlights of the book, I would say. Bart Lotzma, Sandra Manninger, Ryan Vincent Manning, Joe Knobloch all provided for a sort of like theoretical understanding of what we're actually trying to decipher here. And in the following, I'd like to always read from the introduction of each of those chapters. Suppositions are the silent assumptions that live beneath the surface of any hypothesis, theory, or model. They are the enigmatic propositions that guide the trajectories of our conceptual frameworks and provide a foothold for further interrogation. Suppositions are like threads woven into the fabric of theories, often hidden from plain sight, but nonetheless shaping the texture and structure of our intellectual constructs. They are the starting point of our investigations, the launching pads for our journey. In their ambiguity and uncertainty, suppositions are a testament to the elusive nature of knowledge itself. We may base our suppositions on existing evidence or logic, but ultimately they are grounded in nothing more than our own subjective perceptions and intuitions. The suppositions in this book are hunches, haruspices, premonitions of a field in motion, just as geologists measure the strength of an earthquake as it unfolds, or a volcanologist observes an eruption in action. The texts in this chapter examine the development impact of diffusion models. Yet, despite their ineffable quality, suppositions remain an essential component of theoretical development. They provide a framework for hypothesis formation, experimentation, and observation. They are the hidden scaffolding upon which our theories are built. Ludwig Wittgenstein argues that suppositions are embedded in every nook and cranny of our language. Michel Foucault posed that suppositions can be challenged and subverted towards critical inquiry, while Karl Popper emphasized the crucial role of suppositions in forming an hypothesis. The suppositions presented in the following pages, much like the lines of force and equilibrium in a building, weave a tapestry of thoughts providing stability and direction in the investigation of diffusion models, guiding the trajectory towards the discovery of new knowledge. Similar to the intricate blueprints of architecture, suppositions furnish a framework for the development of hypotheses and theories. serving as a compass in a journey towards a more profound comprehension of artificial intelligence in architecture design. Let's continue with the commorances, another one of those boxes that help humans sort data. I would like to thank Corey Peak, can you hear me now? Well, it's a little, yes. Hello, everybody. Wait, this way. All right. I cannot share the screen. If you look at me like this, I can also do like, draw everything on the bit. Totally, I'm totally out. Oh no, I cannot draw here. I have to find a board somewhere. We cannot share. Little coffee break.
That should do it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Here we go again. All right. Can you see my screen? Oh, great. Good. So in the taxonomy of synthetic imaginations, commorances refer to a collection of architectural entities that can be inhabited: houses, dwellings, residences, abodes, domiciles, down to the temporary shelters. It is an archaic term that allows to stretch and bend the meaning of inhabitation and use it as an elastic envelope for the examples seen in this segment of the book. The morphing abilities of the term also allows for a translation that means place of residence or simply place. As Evan S. Casey laid out in The Face of Place, a philosophical history, house and home have much broader connotations which primarily refer to their spatiality, space. I'm talking about space, no? Yeah. Okay. The strange places in this chapter evoke a sense of spatiality as it would occur in a physical environment, even if the images are made based on the numerical data present in the RGB values of the pixels. As much as these places are reduced to images at the moment, there is no doubt that this imagery will spill over into our physical reality sooner or later, or rather sooner than later. Yet place never becomes merely parasitic regarding its architectural properties, nor is it just a byproduct of powerful image generators. It remains its own features and fate, its own local being, regardless of being actual or virtual. One of the main actors regarding the interrogation of place is, of course, Martin Heidegger. His long-winded approach to the problem was defined by the interrogation of being. According to Casey, Heidegger occasionally lost view of the phenomenological problem at hand. This opens the opportunity for a face-off with the problem. Is it not time to face place, to confront it, take off its veil, and see its full face? Is it not time to face up to place? Maybe even giving Comorances a new face, allowing us to find our own inextricable and placed selves. There is a plethora of thinkers who have found new trajectories for the idea of place. All of these thinkers share the fundamental understanding that place is not a static condition, but rather a dynamic and constantly changing entity. This concept applies to a range of contexts, including the course of history, as noted by Fernand Braudel and Michel Foucault, the natural world as explored by Wendell Berry and Gary Snyder, the political realm as discussed by Jean-Luc Nancy and Henri Lefebvre, gender relations and sexual difference as examined by Luce Irigaray, and poetic imagination as studied by Gaston Bachelard and Rudolf Otto. Geographic experience and reality as analyzed by Michel Foucault, Yves Vuitton, Edward Soya, David Simon, and Edward Ralph. The sociology of the polis and the city as observed by Walter Benjamin, Hannah Arendt, and Louis Mumford. Nomadism as described by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari famously, and architecture as explored by Jacques Derrida, Peter Eisenman, and Bernd Tschumi. Examining this basic catalog of names and topics makes one aware of a widespread and weakly connected kinship of fluid and contingent features. This suggests that there is no single and definitely not an ideal domestic place that lies beneath so many varying or at least distinct layers of the stratification of Comorances. Therefore, the emerging history of Comorances based on diffusion models may seem more veiled, thanks to the sheer size of the datasets the results are based upon, resulting in no authoritative overarching story to tell, only a succession of significant events to relate, epochs, cycles, batches, and iterations. Vestures. Vestures take the position of working through the problem of the envelope, the exterior, the facade, the frontage, or wrapping of an object. Generally speaking, vesture refers to clothing or attire, especially when it's considered as a symbol of rank or status. I would like to thank Daniel Bolocha, Nicolo Casas, Daniel Köhler, Andrew Cutlass, Sina Mostafavi, and Asma Mehan for their contributions to this chapter in the book. So the vesture actually encompasses like a variety of things here, right? We saw like envelopes of buildings, regalia is being part of this idea of vestures, and of course also fashion. In the I'm gonna read this again. I'm sorry for that, but I think this would be probably interesting to understand it completely. In the taxonomy of synthetic imaginations, vestures take the position of working through the problem of the envelope, the exterior, the facade, the frontage, or wrapping of an object. Generally speaking, vesture refers to clothing or attire, especially when it's considered as a symbol of rank or status. Coronation robes, regalia, chasubles, dalmatics, kasayas, etc. It can also refer to the covering of a particular object or surface, such as a building or a piece of furniture. This term may refer to the process of placing or positioning clothing onto someone, as well as something, such as when dressing a doll or dressing up a piece of furniture for a photo shoot. It is somewhat more formal approach to the act of putting on clothing. To this extent, this chapter examines the tendency of diffusion models to lend atmospheres and moods to the imagery as an analogy to layers of fabric, leaning towards the painterly and the cinematic in its appearance, embellishing the vestures of architecture. Vestures in architecture function, semiologically speaking, like a true mythology of architectural design, because the architecture signified is objectified, thickened, visually materialized in blobs of pixels, that architecture becomes a mythos of language. In the sense of mythos being tied to a traditional or a current theme or plot structure, akin to the way the vestures in this chapter are generated through the use of recurring language prompts, trying to describe architectural phenomena. So it is in this mythology of architectural design that we can hear the echoes of the future. One could also say it's utopia. Architecture similar to fashion, as for example described by Roland Barthes, serves as a semiotic system through which we communicate with the world around us. The images in this chapter speak to us in a language that is both defamiliarized and expressing the values, desires, and aspirations of sometimes unparticular times and strange places. Simultaneously, the projects are tunneling through the minds of the architecture history in the form of gigantic image datasets. By studying this language, we can begin to understand the deeper meanings and implications of the visual structures in the following pages, just as vestimentary linguistics can help us decode the symbolic messages conveyed by clothing. Architectural linguistics can help us decode the symbolic messages conveyed by the built environment, a built environment yet to come. Estrangements. Thank you very much to Cesare Batelli, Emanuel Coe, Elena Manfredini, Sandra Manninger, Virginia Sanfratello, and Kyle Steinfeld for their incredible contributions to this conversation. Estrangements. The concepts of estrangement in architecture exist within the intensity or the interstice of the recognizable and the defamiliarized, the known and the enigmatic, the ordinary and the evocative. It is a complex and nuanced phenomenon that eludes easy comprehension, necessitating a deep exploration of the language of architecture, its form, materials, and spaces. And here's some examples of people who have worked with this technique or have contributed to this technique profoundly, people like Bertolt Brecht, Günter Bruce, Sigmund Freud, H.P. Lovecraft, many names that you could mention here. The projects in this section live happily in this territory of interrogation. At its core, estrangement serves as a means to challenge assumptions about the world we inhabit. It involves unraveling our perception of architecture, built and unbuilt, pushing beyond the boundaries of our habitual understanding and allowing us to see the world in a new light. This idea is not new and has been explored by philosophers and thinkers throughout history. Hegel's examination of estrangement, Karl Marx's alienation of the working force, examination of estrangement as a tool of self-reflection, Jacques Lacan's charting of the unsettling territory between the conscious and the unconscious. Theodor Adorno's musings about the contradiction and alienation of modern society. Essential for interrogating the projects presented in this book are the concepts presented by thinkers and artists such as Sigmund Freud's analysis of the uncanny, das Unheimliche, Viktor Shklovsky's Ostranienie, Bertolt Brecht's Verfremdungseffekt, estrangement. In the realm of visual arts, Mario Klingemann, Felicia McCormick, a trained architect, by the way, and Sofia Crespo's works offer compelling examples of estrangement. Klingemann's use of machine learning algorithms to create surrealistic images challenges conventional ideas about the role of technology in artistic production. On the other hand, McCormick and Crespo's AI-generated menageries of strange animals, such as the Neurozoo series, present an otherworldly aesthetic that defies easy classification. However, estrangement is not limited to artistic expression. It can also serve as a powerful force for social and political change by challenging our presumptions about the world and inspiring us to imagine new possibilities, as for example described by Katja Hogenbaum. In this sense, it is a tool for subversion, a means of disrupting dominant narratives that shape our lives and opening up new spaces for creativity and innovation. Ultimately, estrangement is a multifaceted concept that resists easy definition or categorization. By exploring its diverse manifestations and examining its potential as a tool for artistic and social change, we can begin to understand its significance in shaping our perception of the world around us. That says it all, the epilogue. There are probably a million ways to end this book, but let me end with a little story. Walter Gropius could not sketch at all, not a bit. At the start of his career working in Peter Barron's office, Gropius kept this handicap a secret. Despite this setback, Gropius persevered in Barron's office and eventually became known for his ability to dictate drawings to his collaborators, proving the power of language to convey the intricate material and spatial relationships in architectural projects. This notion of description was further expanded upon by Sol-Lewitt, who dedicated his entire career to the potency of language in the form of instructions, presaging the emergence of programming and scripting as a means of artistic and architectural expression. The synergy between language and architecture is complex and multifaceted, yet it is clear that language has the ability to convey abstract concepts and facilitate collaboration, offering a powerful tool in the design process. To this end, this book attempted to shed light on the murky shadows of diffusion models by exploring their relationships to language and the architectural imagination. As we close the last chapter of this book on diffusion models in architectural design, it seemed unmistakable to contemplate on the ways in which language, prompting, and theoretical perceptions of thinkers like Wittgenstein, Shklovsky, and Michel Foucault have fashioned our view upon technologies aiding in the imaginary process. As the way to beginning the stands, at the very beginning stands the Wittgenstein's quote, "The limit of my language is the limits of my world." What is the epistemology for diffusion models in architecture? What would Wittgenstein say about large language models and diffusion algorithms? Of course, it is purely speculative. But making deductions from his writings, one could argue that Wittgenstein would have firmly suggested that the meaning of language is closely tied to its use in specific contexts, and that understanding language requires an understanding of the social and cultural practices in which it is embedded. Although large language models and diffusion models in artificial intelligence may be able to generate responses that appear to be intelligent, they may not truly understand the meaning of language as humans do. This stance is closely related to the profoundly skeptical notion that Michel Foucault had in regards to authorship, assigning authorship rather to language than to the author himself. Somehow, this is a very fitting position in our contemporary age, where authorship as a concept is exposed to ever-increasing erosion. Throughout the course of this book, we have also examined the notions of commorances, vestures, and other stuff, underscoring the vital relationship between the built environment and the individuals who inhabit it. By utilizing diffusion models to comprehend and analyze how people interact with their surroundings, designers can conceive a more human-focused design that enhances the lives of those who inhabit them. One of the key concepts we have explored is the idea of estrangement or defamiliarization, a technique used by Viktor Shklovsky to make the familiar seem strange in order to prompt new ways of seeing and thinking. We have seen how these concepts can be applied to architecture design, as diffusion models can prompt designers to think outside their comfort zones and create novel and innovative designs in the neighborhood of Shklovsky's concept. We can find the territory of the uncanny, or das Unheimliche as defined by Sigmund Freud. The projects in this book demonstrate how this principle can be used to explore the means by which technology and architecture can engender feelings of discomfort or unease, but also curiosity and provocation, and how designers can use this effect to create singular and unforgettable experiences for users. Architecture and engineering, like many fields, are rife with concepts that demand attention. And among these concepts, we must also consider the duality of the wicked and the tamed problem. A wicked problem, one that is intricate, multifaceted, and without a definitive resolution, stands in an opposition to the tamed problem, which is reducible and can be resolved by established methods and techniques. Architecture and engineering often present designers with wicked problems, those in which form, function, environmental impact, and social context all converge in a tangle of complexity, occasionally bordering on the irreducible. When confronting these wicked problems head-on, the designer's creative instincts are put to the test, as the resolution of these issues involves much more than merely choosing a single path forward. The computational AI diffusion models can aid in addressing these wicked problems by providing designers with a wealth of data and analysis to inform their decisions. basically interrogating the entire available cultural output of humanity through immense datasets. Yet, we must remember that the use of AI models does not necessarily eliminate the complexity of wicked problems. Rather, such models can tame some aspect of the problem and provide a framework for exploring possible solutions. The criticality of this designer's intuition and creativity cannot be overlooked in the face of the computational assistance, and it is the designer's navigation of the problem's intricacies that will ultimately lead to the most innovative solution, offer a faster and more objective way to retrieve information. Looking toward the future, it is clear that artificial intelligence will continue to play an increasingly important role in the field of architectural design. As computational AI diffusion models become more advanced and sophisticated, designers will have access to an unprecedented level of data and analysis, enabling them to create buildings, neighborhoods, and cities that are more responsive to the needs and desires of their users. However, as we move forward, it is important to remember the value of human creativity and intuition in the design process. While AI can offer valuable insights and analysis, it is ultimately up to the designer to make the final decision and bring their vision to life by combining the power of computational AI diffusion models with human creativity and intuition. By doing so, we can create a future of architecture that is both technologically advanced and deeply, deeply human-centered. The end.
Thank you so much, Matias. That was a wonderful journey into diffusions. And so while we're looking for the handheld microphone, maybe I can start by thought myself. It's also kind of interesting. This is before your lecture, last week we had a very public I was thinking about like both both in terms of like symbolic language and bringing this parts that the deals were being system and there's and so on. All this it made me think about we use these fields talk about architecture, formal language already before.
idea of authorship, generally speaking, because it's just really stopping us from doing more interesting things, being like this. It is, by the way, a rather new concept, right? It's not that old. It's like, 16th, 17th century, and then this idea of the artist and his authorship, and with the artist, you can also connotate the architect and his authorship. It's a very romantic idea from the early 19th century, which a couple of German romanticists came up with, which we're cherishing for no reason, actually. I don't know if this answered my question at all, but maybe a starting point.
Yeah, I mean, it was threw some ideas, you threw some ideas back. So maybe our audience can continue this dialogue if you have more questions about authorship or no one? Yes.
Thank you, Matias, so much for sharing the book. It's so interesting to see a book come out of maybe the last year and a half of generation of images in a very conventional form of sharing of knowledge. The lecture, your categorizations are great, and I think I'd like to focus on estrangement in the question, an area which I think in your work you've focused on for years and years and years, and you're probably well suited more than probably anybody I know theoretically to understand the form of estrangement that generative AI brings. There's a bias towards the three-dimensional image. There's a bias towards surrealism, so that's, in some ways convenient to categorize about estrangement. And so in some ways in computational culture, the image has been looked at as sort of secondary compared to a drawing or a model, physical model, a digital model, and that models are serious and images are sort of not, up until the last couple of years. And something's happened profoundly to kind of change the status of the image. Maybe I'm asking for a prediction about what might happen in the coming, maybe not months, but few years, about the potential for AI within the iceberg, the metaphor of the iceberg as you go further down, to get to the three-dimensional AI and the model as the kind of the more serious kind of part of architecture, where we are able to kind of produce the twin of space and design it in advance, and that happens through models, not images. So what are your thoughts on that?
That is a great question. I mean, the funny thing is that if you think about it, architecture has been like a visual culture for a very long time, right? So the image was always somehow important to us. It's nothing that happened now. I think this was embedded in our discipline forever. If you think about Logier's primitive hut, it's like everyone has seen that during his studies. How many images do you see while you're studying to learn what's a Gothic church, what's a Baroque church? So it's a very visual culture. And I've compared it also, funny enough, to how machine learning processes learn about features. It's very similar to how students learn about architectural features in a way. At the end of the day, you give them enough images, at some point they will be able to differentiate between a Baroque and a Gothic church. Yeah. So the visual was always there. I mean, we're not like purely numbers driven, like in talking about plans and numbers. Even a plan or a section is at the end of the day an image. It's just an image, like an abstract representation of something that we might some way at some time experience physically. But of course, like the explosion of imagery we saw in the last couple of years, that's like a different level. And what is the main difference being that before that, you had people who maybe were, had seen enough interesting things that they were able to do like an interesting rendering of something. Hernandez Alonso, for example, being an example of that. So he's seen enough things that influenced him as a designer, whether these were cheap science fiction movies or doctoral books, and combining all those features into something new that we were like, in awe about. That's a human way to doing that. Something similar happens, of course, with these diffusion models, just with a much larger data set. Yeah. So instead of having like a couple of 100 books that somebody sees in his life, maybe thousands if he's good, it's millions and millions of images that you can call to create a cultural artifact that is based on this whole cloud of imagery at the end. Yeah. So this is like a super interesting area of discussion. what the estrangement part is, this is a funny thing that's happening. What I'm seeing is the earlier diffusion models were actually much more prone to hallucinating stuff and doing things wrong, which actually needed much more interpretation by the human to make sense out of it, which I thought was really interesting, provocative, and different. The newer models are getting so good that it's boring. It's vanilla. Yeah. So there's a way that you need to somehow differentiate those things. And even like, I know people who are like saying, man, I'm going to stake to version 4. It makes more interesting stuff. Yeah. Which you can. Why not? Yeah. And then about the next one, the next question you made was about the 3D models. And this is a harder nut to crack. Yeah, this has a lot to do with the computational power that we have at our hands. It has to do with the lack of good data sets for architecture that just don't really exist. Because to be fair, we're pretty late in the game of using AI in compared to other disciplines. Yeah. So we're also very late in creating the tools that we need to do something like that. But we're working on it. I'm confident that in like 2-3 years' time, it will be possible to really generate things in 3D, properly in 3D, not like the things we're seeing now, because what we're seeing now in terms of generating 3D models is very often not really usable. Yeah. I'm talking really about usable OBJ models that we can continue working on in a BIM modeling environment and so on. This is going to see, it's going to take a little bit, but we're going to see that sooner or later.
Kind of follow up on that. I'm going to pick the other microphone too, but I think it's interesting what you say about the first models giving more kind of fuzzy pictures that you couldn't really tell them when you experimented with Sandra, and now they're a bit more boring. And then like talking on the aspect of visual, so are we more or less visual when you know what the creativity lies into kind of finding the right language props, right? So I'm also trying to maybe rephrase and clarify like some ideas I tried to ask in the beginning, because you probably know that also the SAPE grammar framework, like we talk, like at MIT, we were talking a lot about with George Stein about and Terry Knight and kind of thinking visually. Like, so you see a SAPE and you think something else, and that's like the creative process of the designer. Like you see something and imagine something else. So when you start from language, though, like how does it change the design, like the creative process?
I mean, if you think about it, I don't think that we know enough in terms of just the neuroscience of creativity and the neuroscience of how we come up with a design to really analyze it to the point that we can synthetically create it in an AI environment. What I'm trying to say here is whether you're using language creatively or sketching something, I don't think there's a big difference. Both of them are sort of creative processes that help you to come up with a solution. Right. So, and I wouldn't talk like, I wouldn't do like a best of, like saying language is first, sketching is second, computational design is third. I think all those things are like more or less on a plateau. Yeah. I like actually really to think more of the design process as is happening today, more as a plateau where you have different players influencing that design decision that you're making, instead of thinking it of a pyramid where you have the designer on top of it and then everything else comes down. Right. And this is a fairly, I think, well-based assumption. I don't know if you've heard about James Bridle's book, what's it called, Being? James Bridle's new book, Ways of Being, that's what it's called. In Ways of Being, for example, he describes how our world is populated by a variety of different intelligences, yeah, that we're starting to acknowledge. So we're starting to understand that octopuses have a certain intelligence, ravens have a certain form of intelligence, forests have even a certain way of intelligence. They can communicate with each other. Plants can communicate. So all those things are not science fiction anymore. They're scientifically proven by a ton of papers from the last 30 years. And he made an amazing book that actually tries to explain to us humans that we have to get rid of the idea of being unique. Once we do that, we can open up to other forms of creativity. We can open up to other forms of inspiration. We can open up to other forms of creating, even, for example, a thing like creativity, it's by now, like everyone puts that into like the human realm, yeah? But that an ape actually creatively can use stones and sticks to get things to eat, that's a form of creativity too, right? Or that even an octopus changing his color, I don't think that's innate. It's something that he intentionally has to do, which is also a form of creativity. So what I'm trying to say is maybe more this discussion about the posthuman rather than the super top-down what is more important, writing or images question. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think bringing the posthuman and
Yeah.
kind of the agency in that way, it's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't have an answer either. I mean, like it's it's positions, like
Yeah.
it's questions, but it's interesting to see like different models now, like maybe coming up in designing. Yes, Giovanni.
Thank you for sharing, Matias. I have a comment and a question. Comment is by looking to at the beginning of your presentation when you were talking about the reversing code from image to pixel and then from pixel to words and from words to pixels. So it made me think about the ways of songs, the Chatwin way of describing space and places through words, not through images. So those words were able to become then images through the cognitive processes of people listening to those words. So it's an interesting process that belonged to the tribes, to the Aboriginal tribes. So it's a very rooted in our mind also, this idea of the possibility of building imaginary world through words and not just through images. So it's interesting that we are doing that backwards process using technology. And that was something that your presentation made me think about. So it's a very interesting way of remapping the space and the places through words. And then the question is, from your standing point, in this interaction between I and AI, because it's a mutual interaction, right? So the AI is evolving while we are using and is producing and it's kind of self-creating itself, but at the same time is affecting our way of thinking and our way of envisioning realities, as computer has been affecting our way of thinking and producing drawing, not only as a medium, so not only in terms of images, but in terms of rethinking the formal structure of the creative processes. So from your standing point, how do you think then in 10 years, 5 years, the AI will be affecting our eye?
Thank you very much. That's a very fascinating question, because I have the feeling that most people are not aware that AI is affecting them already all the time. Yeah, I mean, you go on Amazon, you get book recommendations. That's already an AI doing that. You go to a bank, fill out a check, and you give it to somebody. No human is going to ever look at that check. It's going to be a machine that recognizes the number. So like our life is already surrounded by AI. It's just not that invasive that we really notice it all the time, except you really put you start thinking about it, and you're like, oh, well, yeah. So the scheduling of the subway here in New York is actually defined by an algorithm. The way the lights are put in the streets is defined by an algorithm. So all of those things, even if it doesn't say, there's no sticker saying AI on it, right? But it's still there. It's still influencing us. And I think that the book, for example, I did is maybe a little bit more aggressive in pushing that this thing is there and we can use it as a design tool for architecture, and we need to be aware that we should use it. More importantly, I think is actually the increasing the literacy of AI in our own discipline, for example, or probably in all disciplines by now. Yeah, that trying to understand what's happening under the hood, how is it influenced, how is it biased, culturally and ethically and in terms of race, racial biases. So being aware about all those things. I have to ask you again about the question one more time.
Do you see the future of this process of mutual interaction, because it's a both way going, and it's an interaction that's been already affecting our brain and our way of thinking and approach reality, but we'll be doing that farther and farther. So what do you think will be the space where we will be interacting through?
That's a great question. I think what we need to be aware of is that we should rather use it as an expansion of our abilities as humans, rather than having fear of being overwhelmed by it. And so as long as you understand that it's a technology, it's a tool like many others we have had before in architecture, right? The main difference being that it's a tool that can learn. That's like the main difference, but it's a tool. And I think what architects will do, hopefully in the next couple of years, is do what they always have been really good in, which is adapting to these new tool sets that we can use to improve our work, to make it better. And ultimately, hopefully, make the world a little bit better with that. That would be a great win for architecture. So that's my hope. Whether I can predict what's going to happen is a different story. Yeah, but that is my hope, and I think the hope is something that you can you can try working on it, right? I mean, I try working on it somehow to explain people they shouldn't be afraid of it. That actually it's a technology. I'm personally more afraid of people who use this technology for malicious intents, but I'm not afraid of the technology itself. Yeah. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen in 10 years or so. It's too far away. Maybe one thing I want to add to this is that I see like there's two different speeds of development in AI. One is the publicly visible, where you have like all these diffusion models and large language models and so on, that every year they become much, much better, much more precise, much more realistic and so on. And everyone is super impressed about that, understandably. But there's also like below that, in the lower layers of the iceberg that I showed today, there are those developments of people that they know they need another 10 years to make it work, or another 5 years to make it work. AI already failed once by overpromising. Yeah, there was the famous AI winter in the 70s. It's very easy that can happen again if you start to overpromise. So I'm not going to promise you that next year we're going to have like an amazing AI model that can do 3D stuff. I know it's going to take more time to do that. Yeah. I hope this answers your question somehow.
Hi, Matias. How are you? First, amazing lecture. I think, like you said, when you send some requests for your book, people are so enthusiastic to get back to you and contribute, because I think it's one of those topics that's really touching our nerves as more visually inclined people too, and I love that story that you finished with, was it Walter Gropius who couldn't sketch a lick, and his kind of instructional skills became kind of, his role and his prominence. And yeah, I think it was really good connector to really, show the power of language. And also in the same way, language also being, synonymous to also drawing, this, either visual, written, spoken, a kind of direction that we give things to make them physical, in our world, and the power that has. And kind of my question to piggyback on this idea of power and AI, and I also have no doubt, like the direction for AI, the power that it will have, even from the 70s to now is a very short period of time in reference to humanity. So how much power can an architect have? Really, I think maybe can become a question too, and I think starts to answer kind of those social implications that, there's already been really powerful architecture that has changed lives and has political implications. So this kind of supercharged tool that, very easily could be manipulated and is already manipulating, how that supercharged tool can be, regulatorily managed, educationally managed, and also kind of off of that question, in practice too, not just bureaucratically, but also in practice, let's say having an architect, having a designer, having a data-driven expert in your team, but also maybe having a civic designer, someone who's civically and socially conscious. Yeah, I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me an idea for another book. This is a lot of questions. Yeah. So which one is your favorite question?
Favorite one, I think, you pick.
You throw the ball right away back. Okay.
Your next book.
Yeah, the next one. No, first of all, buy this one first, and then no. So the thing is, I don't know. There's like yes, there's one question I think that you came up with, which I think is really important, which is the question of power. Like, who has power when it becomes about AI? Do architects have power? Generally speaking, architects don't have that much power anyways, right? So, but you have the power, if you're working with AI, you have the power to select which data set you're using. You have the power to select which algorithm you're using. You have the power to select what kind of prompting you're using. So there's like certain things you can do. You can change the weights and so on. So there's like a couple of things. But if you talk about power like in a more metaphorical role, yeah, not just practical, what you kind of do or don't do. Where comes the data from? Who pays for that data? This is one of the most important things here. I try to educate my students, for example, about the fact that they're giving away data all the time for free, so to speak. And companies that are scraping the data are making not millions of dollars, billions of dollars out of that. Yeah. I'm asking myself, why are we giving away that power for free? Right? It's because we don't know. People don't know. Right? So that's what I was talking about: education, literacy of how these technologies operate. Power is an important thing because it is very well known by now. Who controls the power controls the world. That's just a fact. We know that, right? And there's a reason why, for example, data is called the new oil. Yeah. It's because it's a resource. But the difference between a natural resource that is just out there and people tap into it and data is the data was created by humans in most cases, at least the ones you want to organically use. Yeah. So is this a natural resource? Are we using our whole population of the world as a natural resource? I mean, so these are power questions. Yeah. And I think we're far away of solving those. I mean, I know that the EU right now published the EU AI Act, which is at least a start in understanding that we need regulation. We need to figure out how this data flows, what is a fair use of it, how do we avoid biases, at least to a certain extent. There's a lot of questions that we still have to answer.
We are with overtime, but if there's a burning question, we can take it. Perhaps we have a burning question. No? All right. Thank you so much. There was
Thank you for the
a lot of food for thought, and we are excited for the new book.
Where is the book? Yes, in Veracruz. Yes.